Hi there. The purpose of this little video is to introduce us with a major school of ethical thought called Deontology, the science of virtue, determining what is the right course of action in any given circumstances, in which the motivations are all important and the consequences are the exact opposite. They're not important. Immanuel Kant is obviously the key figure that looms large in deontology. Kant is trying to show for his fusion of rationalism and empiricism how we can determine what is and what isn't a virtuous act. And most importantly, Kant argues that we must be virtuous in order to be autonomous. That is to say, if we allow anything other than the motivations of an act to determine our action, we're letting those consequences act for us, and we're not being autonomous. Kant was born in Königsberg, which was Germanic, it's now part of Russia, and it's said that he never left a sort of 10-mile radius of Königsberg. He spent virtually his entire life within Königsberg and the surrounding areas. So I think contemporarily one can think of Kant as a person as a bit like Sheldon Cooper.
You know, in many circles, Kant was nicknamed the Königsberg clock because when he was out for a stroll, you could set your watch by him. If you had a house in such and such a place, you would know he would be there at a certain time. He was that predictable in his movements.
Let's look at the following example. Benjamin Constant, a critic of Kant, gave the following suggestion. Kant argues that it's never acceptable to lie. If you lie to someone, you are in fact saying that it's okay for everybody else to lie, and that's implausible. Now, what Constant argues is, imagine you are in a house and a local murderer comes to the door. A hard situation to imagine, but let's roll with it. Suppose you are in your house with your best friend and you go and answer the door. And then this murderer asks, is your friend in the house? Is it acceptable in this situation to lie? Now, Kant argues that it isn't. Under no circumstances are we allowed to tell a lie. What he does say is that you can say a misleading truth. I don't know if my friend is there, which of course is technically true. As you've gone to the front door, your friend might have jumped out of the window or might have gone somewhere else. So the misleading truth, I don't know, is acceptable. But even in that situation, when you might consider, you not putting your friend in harm's way, it's unacceptable to lie. So I think it's worth us spending a little bit of time going over Kant's broader philosophy to see how we get to the situation whereby even in instances like this, the consequences of an act are irrelevant and we must always act according to what Kant calls the categorical imperative. Do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you.
Kant argues that politics must always bend the knee to morality. That is to say that what is the right thing to do is always the thing that one should do, and no other consequence, no other consideration should take sway over morality. The way we work out what the right thing to do is this. We apply the categorical imperative to do unto others as we would have them do unto us, or actually what Kant says is do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. So a negative version, if you will, of the golden rule. So what Kant argues is in addition to that, is we must live our life as if our actions would become our maxim. That is to say, if we do something, we are making a moral rule out of that action and saying that it's applicable in other circumstances. So if I lie, what I am in fact saying is that there is a moral rule which says that it's acceptable to lie, and therefore everyone is acceptable. everyone is allowed to lie, it's acceptable to lie, and it means that other people can lie to me, which of course, according to the categorical imperative, is wrong. Therefore, I must know that it's always right to tell the truth. And from that, we get to a situation which is that when we're faced with an ethical dilemma in life, we must always think, how shall I make sure my action in this regard becomes a maxim, and a maxim that acts in accordance to the categorical imperative? We must always be making these moral consequences. And the consequences of an act are an irrelevance. Only us thinking in terms of making a maxim of the categorical imperative make us autonomous, rational, and virtuous actors in life. So therefore, the sort of utilitarian thinking, what action would bring the most happiness, is an irrelevance. It is always what is right according to maxims, the categorical imperative. And also, Kant asks us to think of everyone always as ends as opposed to means to an arbitrary end. We must always think of other people as being an end in themselves, never a means to another end. So we can never use someone else to bring about happiness overall. There's a famous science fiction story in which there's a society which is really, really happy, but this happiness depends upon an imprisoned child who's really unhappy. The consequentialist way of looking at this is that unhappiness brings about lots and lots of happiness. Now, for a variety of reasons, Kant would be opposed to this, but crucially here, we're using that child to bring about happiness elsewhere. And that means that we're using them as a means to an arbitrary end rather than an end themselves. Now, in actual fact, what Kant says is, because it becomes really, really complicated in the sort of human society if we think of never using another person as a means to an arbitrary end, but also what Kant says is that we should always equally see someone as being an end in themselves, never just a means to an alternative end. So there's quite a lot to unpack there. Kant says, firstly, the motivations of an act are always the most important. Secondly, he says we should always live our lives as if our actions become a maxim, a moral rule. That maxim, thirdly, should always be in tune with the categorical imperative. That is to say, do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. And that's the way we bring about the sort of deontological Kantian worldview, whereby, the economy, politics, everything must always bend the knee to morality. That is to say, morality is more important than any of those things.